Hello, everyone. So glad that you can join us. It's Vic A here at another recording session, and we are really excited about this next guest that we have. Somebody I've gotten to know a bit more over time here, and that's Rachel Goor from Workrowd. Rachel, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. So glad that you can be here, to tell us about things that you're working on. Very interested about your perspective of the general HR market and HR technology market at that. So I'm sure folks will enjoy our conversations as much as I've enjoyed our conversations. So sounds cool.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about Workrowd. And, we all obviously love your work. So definitely excited to have this opportunity to chat with you today.
Awesome. Well, like for those who don't know, Rachel, how about you tell us like a little bit about yourself, like your background, kind of where you're coming from. Like we like to hear about people's journeys. It's always so interesting about how you wind up here. So how about you share like a little bit about that first?
Absolutely. So for pretty much as long as I can remember, I've always been really interested in the intersection between social impact and technology. So I started off my career doing AmeriCorps with a company that had just won a multi-million-dollar grant to expand broadband access and technology tools and skills into underserved neighborhoods. So that was really exciting. And then from there, I kind of bounced around a number of nonprofits, building state-level education partnerships in ed tech, doing development work for direct service organizations, some web development even, just trying a whole bunch of things and building as many skills as I could in search of what was going to drive the most impact. So as part of that journey, I ended up going for a master's degree at MIT, and that's sort of where all of my experience kind of came together.
Okay.
So a couple classmates and I ended up founding a company that leverages technology to expand access to affordable housing. And that is still running today. They're doing great work. I learned an infinite amount in that process.
Yes.
But while I was building it, I couldn't shake this nagging idea that ended up leading me to leave to run Workrowd.
Very cool. So it sounds like you've had a background in some, entrepreneurial pursuits before, and we're going to get into Workrowd here in a bit because I'm really excited about the potential and what it's doing for organizations. But, with your perspective, I think I really like to kind of ask this question of folks, right? This broad HR tech market or just HR, solution market that's, now more than ever front and center for key C-suite leadership. So I'm curious to get your perspective about what's something about the HR tech market that you find interesting or that people aren't really talking about, right? It could be like related to Workrowd, or it could be just, Rachel's musings, right? Very curious, like to get your thoughts on that.
Oh man, Rachel's musings might get a little dangerous here. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I think that the HR tech market is really exciting. I think it's a fascinating space to be in at this time, right? To your point, things are just, I don't even know how to describe how rapidly things are completely changing. It's so interesting. Something that I feel like I've been talking about a lot recently, and I think I mentioned to you in a previous conversation, there's been this giant push in recent years to have everything happen in the flow of work, right? People should be getting every notification in the tools they already have, right? And never have to leave that space. And maybe that still makes sense, but right, from my perspective, maybe that made sense when everyone was in the office and they could actually physically step away and go chat with somebody in a break room or, run into someone in the hallway. But now that a lot of that is off the table, and folks are remote and hybrid, I actually think that some things need to come out of the flow of work.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe maybe people don't want to get pinged about the free yoga class that you just organized for them in the same place that they're getting hit up by 4 different colleagues about the deadlines they're under, right? Like maybe they don't want to get their health benefit information delivered to them in the same place that they're trying to get feedback on an urgent customer request.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe some of these things need to live in a separate, almost digital break room space where employees can step away and access them on their own time instead of just getting hit with an endless flow of information. So
yeah, that's a good point. Like I like that terminology, a digital break room, right? And I think I'll be even I think about myself where there are so many distractions now that pull us away, and digital well-being is even a broader topic of how do we reduce distractions, focus. There's been studies showing that the attention span of folks now is becoming smaller and smaller, and it doesn't help if things are always popping up. So I think you have a really interesting perspective there, that perhaps flow of work was good when we were perhaps in office. Now that we are switching to a more hybrid or remote model, everything is on your screen. So if everything is popping up at various times, perhaps there's a different way of approaching that, Yeah.
Totally. I think it remains to be seen, right? And I don't think it's a one size fits all, right? That the digital break room concept isn't going to work for everyone. Some people do want everything in one place. But again, I mean, to your point, I think with work changing so radically for so many people, the idea of compartmentalizing some things so employees can better manage their attention and their time, I think that there's value in that right now.
Absolutely. But thank you for sharing. Again, I always like to ask that. It's such an interesting question to see where people's thoughts are about the broader market here. But I'm very, very excited to let you share about Workrowd. So if you don't mind, tell us about your startup. Tell us about Workrowd. What is it? And I really love to hear the inception story, because a lot of times these things are birthed out of frustration or observations or things like that, and we really want to know what challenges or problems you're solving. So how about you share a little bit about Workrowd here, Rachel?
Yeah, how did you know this is my favorite topic ever?
I had a guess.
Like you're reading my mind.
I know.
So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Workrowd came out of a lot of conversations I had while I was building my first company. And most of those conversations were with people who just randomly shared about their jobs, right? I wish that my company offered more insert need here, right? I can't tell you how many times I heard some version of that sentence. And that need could be anything from social impact opportunities to professional development, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, wellness, right? Things that companies are investing a lot of time and money into, right? But that it's not meeting the need.
Yeah.
So I went off and reached out to a couple hundred HR professionals, and a number of them were very generous to meet with me. And I asked them, right? I was like, coming from a community organizing background and from an entrepreneur's perspective, it sounds like there's a really strong problem solution fit here, right? Couldn't employees drive a lot of this programming for themselves and take some of this off your plate? And a lot of them were like, yes, I would love that, right? I'm a little bit nervous about employees being able to run this stuff.
Right.
So I don't know, but also here, all of these stories I had of these really strong employee advocates who wanted to do X, Y, or Z, and I didn't have any way to support them or empower them, right? And maybe more concerningly, what I also learned is that a lot of companies are, again, investing time and money into these programs, and they're barely tracking them.
Interesting. Yes.
Right? A lot of companies are running these initiatives, and then they ask about them 10 months later on their annual engagement survey. And they're like, remember that thing we did back in March? Remember that? What'd you think? you're not going to get realistic feedback at that point, right? So this was a really interesting, it felt like a really interesting gap in the market. And when we started to kind of get out there with our MVP, we started seeing interest from way larger companies than we could realistically work with at that point with an MVP, which kind of, gave us the market validation that we needed, but also, we realized this was a much bigger problem than we were prepared to solve at the time. So that's kind of where Workrowd sits, right? The three sort of big pillars that we offer is this central hub, right? So rather than offering things, trying to manage your professional development programs, your social impact, right? All of those things I listed before. At most companies, they're managed through an absolute jungle of different systems right now.
Yeah, they're separate systems for sure.
They're in chat and they're in email and calendars and on an intranet from 1992. They're all over the place, right? And so when a new employee comes in, they don't always know how to find it, right? So we heard from a lot of people that, somebody found out there was a mentoring program they could have joined 3 years ago, right? And they were on the cusp of leaving the organization, and this would have totally changed their trajectory, right? That shouldn't be happening.
That should not, yeah.
Right, so we bring everything together into this central hub so that every employee from day one, no matter where or when they work, has full transparency and access to everything that's available to them, right? The second thing that we do is that we provide best practice resources to actually empower employee leaders and sort of keep them on track. So something that you and I talked about a lot last time, Vic, was employee resource groups.
Yes, big one, huge.
Right, and the fact that these folks are already under outsized emotional strain in the workplace just by being from an underrepresented background, right? They're taking on this typically volunteer work. So not only are these folks doing this volunteer work that supports their colleagues in this really, really important space of driving equity and inclusion, right? But they also don't have any easy way to manage what they're doing. There's not typically a good way for for leadership to empower them or for even get a really strong read on what they're doing.
And the impact of it, yeah.
Absolutely. And the turnover at the leadership level for things like ERGs tends to be pretty frequent. And a lot of times things just fall through the cracks.
That's true.
That's really tough, right? So we put together not only this central place that everybody can come together, but also resources for them to draw on, right? Because the majority of them are stuck reinventing the wheel over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And anytime they want to run an activity or something, they have to Google, right? It's not like there's somewhere for them to go, right? So we're trying to bring some resources together to empower those folks, keep them on track, and try to mitigate that sort of concern that HR felt about, do I want to give employees the ability to run things? You've got transparency, you can see what everybody's doing, right? And we've got things to keep folks on track. Okay. And last, but certainly not least, perhaps most relevant to this podcast, we've got real-time analytics, right? Rather than running a program and then not following up on it for months or never following up on it, we send out, automated surveys immediately afterwards. You don't have to worry about that. So you're getting immediate feedback on that stuff. We've got pulse surveys, and then we're also tracking activity and usage, things like RSVPs to events, downloads of different resources to see what people are actually using, things like that, all into these really, really easy to read dashboards. And then you can actually compare across your programs, right? So you can see what's driving impact instead of just like, oh, we'll throw this at the wall and see if this helps employees. Like maybe we'll find out when we run our engagement survey.
The next year.
Exactly.
No, Rachel, I'm remembering why I was so excited when we spoke, right? Because now in our time and our climate, DE&I and all that really encompasses like the diversity from a broader standpoint is so front and center to a lot of organizations. And over the past 2 years, there's been an increase in the number of chief diversity officers or senior leadership around culture and talent and experience. And a lot of them are struggling, right, to find ways and mechanisms to show the business that what they are doing has an impact, right? So what are those leading measures that can be tied to the lagging measures like engagement or retention and things like that. A lot of what I loved were two things. One was that Workrowd gave those people who are responsible for that kind of engagement the ability to track and measure, but then two, from the employee resource group standpoint, because I've actually been in a situation where I've had to start one of these on your own, and you don't know what to do. They're just like, go forth, be great, be awesome, which is great, but more structure, more empowerment, a community, and more examples of what I can do would have been tremendously helpful. And I think that Workrowd, having that as a resource, for those ERGs to kind of self-build, get some ideas, share, things like that, and that they're doing fantastic. So sorry, I just remembered all of this again, and I'm like, this is so cool.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize. A few things on that, right? To your point, it's such hard work, right? And in so many cases, these diversity leaders are just like, here, fix this giant systemic problem for 50,000 employees, right? Like how? And here are 0 tools to help you. Go ahead, right? I am not a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert and would never purport to be. I am very much still on my own self-education journey, but right, what I feel like I can contribute to this very, very difficult and very, very need to be solved problem is coming from the tech side, right? Shameless plug for the Global ERG Network, which is a partnership that we have with an actual diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm, which, again, this is something you and I talked about last time, is actually cross-company, right? So providing this sort of 24/7 network and knowledge sharing between ERG leaders who are doing this extremely difficult and emotionally taxing work. We wanted to bring a little bit more together for these ERG leaders and members to support them. So again, this is cross-company for knowledge sharing, things like that. But we've also got monthly live events. We've got so things like aligning your ERGs to the business case. They also have templates and toolkits and things, and pulling stuff from different companies so that people can see. And then again, being able to hop into this portal and be like, look, we're looking to start a group for disabled folks. What was your experience, right? What did you start off with? How did you get going? Right. What does a charter look like? Stuff like that.
No, yeah, I think that's great. I think initially some organizations may fear, whoa, we're sharing our, resources or our ideas across a network of, organizations. But there's more power and value you get in the shared resource than I think the fear of, a lot of times keeping things internal and inside. And if we're really going to solve a lot of these societal and systemic issues, or at least try to further the conversation, it needs to be, I think, across a collaboration, engagement, and lean in to understanding what our peers at other companies are doing to learn from and see if that works, here, at our organization. So that's great. And, I'm very curious to learn, what's the reaction that you're getting from customers as you share this with, people and customers and things like that? What feedback and reactions are you getting?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it's a bit of a mix, right? Some people immediately are on board. They get it right off the bat. They're like, I love this. I wish I had this, my whole career. I would love to have this much data at my fingertips. This makes so much sense. right? And then there are other folks who, you know, if something is a little unfamiliar or we're all just so mentally exhausted, right? The prospect of having to engage with something new and understand what it is and what it can do for you instead of just relying on, you know, the standard tools of, let me go to these surveys, right? That's how we fix engagement. Hasn't really worked,
that's
right?
right.
Things like that. Having to do that mental exercise, it's tiring, right? I get it. So, you know, we've had some mixed reactions. We obviously love it when people get it right off the bat. Some people, it takes them a little bit longer to come around. So it's just a matter of kind of finding that thing that's really going to grab them and bring them in, right? Like understand what problems folks are having, because we, you know, like anyone building a startup, we're obviously giant evangelists for Workrowd, and we think it can solve all of these problems, right?
As expected, yes.
So it's really a matter of understanding what their specific problems are and where Workrowd can plug in to kind of change the game. And to your point, there has been, you know, some concerns around data sharing and things like that, especially with the cross-company community. But at the end of the day, I think that people, one, you know, this is my second tech product that I've built. We've been building with security absolutely top of mind since day zero. So I think that that's a little comforting to people, but I think they also understand that the value of having this knowledge base, you know, like so many other, you know, business units have, right? Like marketing and sales, they have so many tools and they have so many sort of networks they can tap into and knowledge share. You know, we feel there's always LinkedIn and stuff, but we feel like this is really needed, like a really targeted space for folks. So I think that they're really, once they get over the initial concern, they understand that the benefits just vastly outweigh the costs.
Agreed. Like, I think there's, you know, if you really want to advance and, you know, make significant impact in the realm of DE&I, I think that, you know, things like this are a no-brainer, tapping into broader resources to get more ideas to really kind of either, you know, take them as like they are or take them and tailor them for your organization. I think that's fantastic, you know, and you know, I'm curious to know what's the, you know, as you've been working and, you know, things like that, what's the most interesting or surprising thing you've learned kind of, you know, either it's building this startup or talking with customers, you know, just curious to you know, have your sage points of wisdom here.
Can't guarantee wisdom, but I will do my best.
Okay.
So I think, you know, the first shock that really led us to go sort of full force into this was how little data companies actually had around this stuff, right? If you don't know where you're at, how can you get better, right? How do you know if you're actually serving employees, right? So when we have these conversations over and over again of like, why is engagement always so low? Why aren't we making progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And obviously, there are a ton of factors that come into play there on both parts. But ultimately, if we don't have the data, then we're not going to be able to figure out how to get to how to reach our goals. So I think that was really surprising, but also really exciting, right? Like I think that there's a big opportunity here. And as so many more organizations are hiring folks like employee experience officers and chief diversity officers, right? These folks are going to need tools to be able to drive forward, right? And as HR tech continues to evolve, there's going to be more interest in technology tools to help with this stuff. So rather than, you know, we've spoken to so many DEI leaders who are wrangling 48 different spreadsheets trying to deal with their data, and they're chasing down people. These are C-suite folks, like chasing down individual ERG leaders trying to get the data from them, or having to wait for another department to like pull some reports for them. Like this is not sustainable if we want to get, you know, if we want to make progress. So I think that that's been a real shock, but also sort of an exciting opportunity.
Yeah. It sounds like, and this is why I think that, you know, Workrowd has a really, really strong thesis of the case here. If you ask your, you know, like your chief diversity officer or experience officers, you know, what the data do you quickly have access to help evaluate your initiatives? A lot of them would pause and, probably pull from this, from this, from this. But if you really want to enable social impact and change and, DE&I, you really do have to enable those people to, one, build for themselves, but then two, enable that data collection to be transparent here. So I love it. I think continuing on with this sage wisdom piece here, even though like you may try to deny this a fun question I always like to ask, because I think that, folks come from this from different perspectives. What's the best piece of career advice you've ever received here as we, like to wrap things up?
Ask for things.
Ask for things. Tell me more.
I am still very bad at this myself, but I think there's sort of this cult of doing everything yourself, especially in entrepreneurship and honestly, just broadly in the US. And I think that there's there's sort of some negative ideas around sort of having to ask for help.
Yeah.
A colleague, actually, one of my teammates at the first startup really taught me this, is she had no qualms about asking for anything. And the number of times people said yes, I would be mortified that like the question was even presented. Right. And then people would be like, yeah, obviously. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. Like there's no downside. Like you have to advocate for yourself and ask for things, right? If you continue to, sit with yourself and not put yourself out there and not ask questions or ask for help, it's going to really impede your progress. And again, this is something that this is a big issue that I personally am working on. But I think just the idea of asking when you need something or want to talk to someone, it just do it, right? Either they'll ignore your email or say no, but you might have a great conversation.
Yeah, I too have struggled like with that. I think there's this a notion of, if you can do it by yourself, it's better or it's easier. And sometimes you're just kind of socially anxious and I want to ask, or, tons of people like
100%
or anything, right? So, but, it's been a process to get out of that shell and say, hey, people 9 times out of 10 are more open to helping or at least directing you to like the best place. So excellent piece of advice here. Excellent piece of advice. Your wisdom keeps flowing, Rachel. I love it.
That is far too generous, but thank you, sir.
So, Rachel, tell people where they can find you to learn more or partner up, or where can people reach out to you?
Absolutely. So pop by our website, workrowd.com. Workrowd is WORKROWD. Thanks for the assist.com. You can feel free to drop us an email. Find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We're at Workrowd. Feel free to reach out to me personally. I'm just at Rachel@workrowd.com, RACHEL at WORKROWD.com. To that point about asking for things, absolutely feel free to reach out. Excited to chat with folks.
Very cool, very cool. And I'll just pop up the email here, like for folks. Again, feel free to ask. It's the best piece of advice. But I think that if you're in organizational, trying to understand, what it is that you can do to drive and enable community, that drive and enable and diversity, equity, and inclusion, a belonging, and you have these programs and, initiatives that you're really trying to get some data on to understand the impact where you really want employees to feel empowered. I think Workrowd is a really, really great partner like with that, and super excited for like where it is and where it's going. So Rachel, super excited. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome. I really appreciate it.
Sure. So all right, folks, until like the next one, have a great day.